Good evening, everybody. We are live, yes, on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, the platform, everywhere. Welcome. This is number 2 of our live sessions, number 2 of 21. So we're getting there. Yesterday, I kind of introduced myself and what these live sessions are all about. And today we're talking about the roads to recovery, to burnout recovery. Now, there were so many questions, so many topics that people wanted covered surrounding recovery. So there will be a few sessions on recovery. What I want to talk about this evening is really where you might be on what I call the cycle of unwellness or the cycle of burnout, and what that means in terms of prevention or recovery for you, because everybody's different. Everybody's at a different stage of stress or overwhelm or burnout. And it might be that one thing works for you, the other one doesn't. It might be that you need a little bit of everything. So I really just wanted to cover, like I said, what I call the cycle of unwellness. And hopefully, when I'm looking on Instagram, this looks backwards. Can someone tell me whether that's just for my benefit? On Facebook and the platform, that looks the right way around. But on Instagram, I will show you this in a minute, but hopefully that's not backwards. What we'll do is we'll go through the cycle of unwellness and how to identify where you are on that cycle, and then basically how we get out of that cycle, how we stop that cycle of burnout and stress and overwhelm from happening. So let's go through the cycle of unwellness. If you're watching this on Instagram, please do let me know that this is the right way around, but I will talk through them all anyway. So we're going to start at the top. Start feeling stressed and overwhelmed as there's just too much to do. So this is kind of the beginning, and you'll see why this is the beginning when we get to the end. It will all make sense. So start feeling stressed and overwhelmed as there's too much to do. It's the wrong way around on Insta. I'm sorry, guys. I did turn off mirror, but apparently that hasn't worked. I'm talking you through it, so hopefully it'll make sense. But if not, you can always watch it on Facebook as well. So start feeling stressed and overwhelmed. There's too much to do. We then move on to promise yourself you'll look after yourself when there's less to do. Hands up, who does that? Promise yourself you'll look after yourself when there's less to do. Next. Oh, not sure if you can see that. There we go. Feel burnt out and have to take time off. So you promise yourself you look after yourself when there's less to do. You reach a point where you feel burnt out and you have to take time off from your responsibilities, whatever they may be. So that might be work, it might be just home life, the home might just all fall into disrepair, but either way, it reaches a point where you just have to take the time off. You're forced to take the time off. Next on there is cram in some well-being until you can get back to the to-do list. So what tends to happen is we get completely stressed, we get completely overwhelmed, we're forced to rest, we're forced to make time for our illness, and then we cram in all the self-care. Like, okay, right, I'm really going to look after myself, I'm going to eat well, I'm going to sleep better, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and we start to feel a little bit better, and we come back to an even bigger to-do list than before. I apologize if you're just tuning in. I know that this is the wrong way around on Instagram. I will put a picture of this up tomorrow as well so you can see it. But we're just going through the cycle of unwellness. So you come back, you've taken this lovely time off, you've crammed in all the self-care, you come back and there's all of the stuff that you left behind, an even bigger to-do list than before. And what happens is we go back to the beginning. We start feeling stressed and overwhelmed as there's too much to do, right? So this is what I call the cycle of unwellness, and it might be that you recognize this whole cycle. It might be that you skip a couple of things in this cycle. So it might be that you go from feeling stressed and overwhelmed and you just go straight to cramming in self-care and then trying to get back on the boat, on the horse, as it were. So it might be that you recognize parts of this cycle. It might be that you do this whole cycle. And the reason that I tell you this is because the way that you prevent or recover from burnout is different depending on where you are in this cycle and how many times you have done this cycle. So if you're thinking about this cycle of unwellness as something that's like, yeah, actually, this happens to me pretty much once a month once every couple of months, then that is chronic burnout. That is chronic stress, and we are unable to break the cycle. And when it comes to that point, we're looking at a path of recovery as opposed to prevention. So, if this cycle of unwellness is something that you repeat and that you're constantly feeling stressed and overwhelmed, you don't make the time to look after yourself, you don't have the time to look after yourself, and you're having to take time off of work or of home because you're so unwell, then that is chronic burnout and chronic stress. And that is when you really, really, really need to talk to a professional, whether that's your doctor or a therapist. And in all cases of burnout, in all cases of chronic stress, I always recommend talking to your doctor, getting the ball rolling. But when it really is super chronic and it's just something that you can't break, then that is when it is at boiling point, and you really do need to speak to a doctor as soon as possible. So if you keep repeating this cycle of unwellness over and over again, then that is chronic burnout. If you recognize this cycle of unwellness and you're thinking, well, yeah, maybe I've done this a couple of times, or, I start feeling stressed and overwhelmed because there's too much to do. And I do put off looking after myself, but I do actually get there in the end. And I haven't really had to take any time off work, or I haven't had to take time off my responsibilities yet. Then you're kind of on the verge of feeling burnt out. So this is kind of your middle ground. It's going to go one of two ways. It's either going to get better or it's going to get worse. And if you're just at the beginning of this cycle, so you're starting to feel stress, maybe there's something in particular going on in your life right now. So maybe there's change going on, or there's something happening at work, generally tends to be, like big management change or something like that. Then you're in the perfect place for prevention, because you're kind of at the beginning of that point and you recognize it, and there are things that you can do to help. So where you are on that cycle will depend, on what's going on in your life and whether this is something that keeps repeating itself. And then it will also dictate what you need to do to recover or to prevent. So I'm sorry if you're watching on Facebook, the platform, my hands are doing all of this all over the shop. So let's think about being at the beginning of this cycle, right? Let's talk about being right at the beginning, where we're not stuck in this loop constantly yet. We're not stuck in a burnout cycle 24/7 yet, but we're beginning to feel a bit burnt out, and we're beginning to feel all of those signs and symptoms kind of kicking in and taking over. What do we do in that instance? So if it's really, really bad, doctor, therapist. If it's just starting to take over, if you're just starting to feel burnt out, what can you do to help yourself prevent it from getting any worse? And one of the things that I learned over the many, many years that I tried to recover from burnout is that obviously everyone is different, but there are going to be different symptoms that you need to treat, as opposed to seeing burnout as this one big, massive thing that you don't know how to deal with. Burnout comes with lots of different signs and symptoms. So it might be that you're not able to get any sleep. It might be that you're not looking after your basic needs. It might be that you're isolating yourself. And we'll talk about that a little bit later this week as well. So thinking about all of those things that have changed since you started experiencing chronic stress or overwhelm and burnout, and thinking, well, what kind of symptoms are these? They might be emotional symptoms, they might be physical symptoms, and writing a list. I know it sounds really weird, like writing a shopping list of everything that's going on in your life that's making you feel stressed and overwhelmed, and saying, well, how do I tackle each of these one by one? Because trying to take on the mammoth task of feeling less stressed and overwhelmed about everything is going to make you feel stressed and overwhelmed. So it might be that you're only experiencing kind of emotional symptoms, and that there's just a lot of stress going on, there's a lot of change going on. And in that case, it's kind of saying, well, what can I do to help with that change? What can I do to reduce the emotional strain? But it might also be that there are physical symptoms. And if you are experiencing burnout, then there are lots of physical symptoms that can come with that, like not being able to sleep, like an increase or a decrease in appetite, and all of those different things. So we have something we call the 5 foundations of wellness at the Anti-Burnout Club. And I'll go through each of these in turn. I want you to think, which of these areas probably needs the most TLC for me now? And on Friday, on live number 5, we'll actually go through these. So if you want to join on Friday, if you want to watch back after Friday, we'll go through each of these in turn as well and what you can do for each one. But for now, just think about these different areas of your life and whether they might be helping or hindering when it comes to stress and overwhelm and burnout. So the first foundation is the basics. And this is basically, am I getting enough sleep? Am I drinking enough water? And am I eating food that makes me feel good? Am I eating regularly? Am I happy with the way that I'm eating? So that is number one. And generally, what we tend to see is when people are really burnt out and stressed, this is the one that takes a massive hit because you can't sleep, you can't eat, you're so stressed, you can't even remember to drink water. So the reason that this is foundation number one is because this is probably the most important and probably the most overlooked. Foundation number 2 is physical health. So how is my physical health? Am I moving my body in a way that feels good for me? Are there any underlying issues that might be causing stress, might be making my stress worse? So at the Anti-Burnout Club, we see a lot of people with chronic conditions, a lot of people with chronic pain, chronic fatigue, and all of that kind of stuff that can really make it difficult to deal with stress and overwhelm. So thinking about your physical health as a whole, how is that doing? And then foundation number 3 is connection. So connection to ourselves, but also connection to others and the world around us. And like I said, a bit later on this week, I'll be talking about social isolation, because this is something that a lot of us do when we're feeling really stressed, when we're feeling really burnt out, is we isolate ourselves. And there's a really important reason why we shouldn't do that when we're stressed and overwhelmed. And I'll be talking about that a little bit later this week. Foundation number 4 is mental well-being. So am I looking after all of the parts of my mental health? I'm a really anxious person, and when I'm stressed, my anxiety flares up. So what can I do to help those things together? And then foundation number 5 is called growth. And this is basically the very last foundation. Once you're happy with everything else, then we can think, well, how do I just go from just surviving to thriving and feeling really, really good in myself as a person again? Because we don't just want to bring you back to kind of this point. We want to go beyond that. We want to feel really good and enjoy our lives. And when we're in the middle of chronic stress and burnout, we feel like we'll never reach that point again. So foundation number 5 is growth. So really think about those foundations and which ones might be taking a hit when you're feeling stressed. And this is kind of the beginning of your road to recovery. Which one can I focus on now that will help me start feeling a little bit better? And on live number 5 on Friday, we'll talk about the different things that you can do for each of these with a wheel of life. And then the last thing that I want to talk about this evening when it comes to recovery is I'd like you to think, and you can get a pen and paper, you can do this afterwards, you can journal on this. I'd like you to ask yourself questions like you're a toddler, right? Toddlers love to know why. And there are many, many different reasons why we may feel chronically stressed. There are many, many different reasons why we may be burning out. I briefly touched on yesterday that mine was kind of linked to loss and trying to prove myself after that loss. But it took a very long time to dig into that why. And when you start to dig into that why, it becomes easier to pave your own road to recovery because you know what that underlying factor is. So what I'd like you to do is grab a pen and paper, and I want you to write, I'm stressed, I'm overwhelmed, I'm burning out, or whatever. And then underneath, write why. And it might be really surface level, that first why. It might be because work is so busy, right? That might be your first one, for example. And then the next question is, well, why? Why is work so busy? Is it something because it's just that time of year? Is it something because you can't say no to your boss, or your boss is a bit of a doesn't take no for an answer? Keep digging, because that surface why that you get is not the underlying reason. And the more you dig, the more you'll be like, okay, maybe I'm trying to prove myself. Maybe actually I've got people pleasing tendencies, and that's what's not helping. So really, really think about why, and spend some time on this tonight or whenever you watch this back, and ask yourself why. like a teenager and find that reason and use that as kind of your goal on your road to recovery. I want to stop this. I want to stop this reason. And it might be, focusing on the basics will help that. It might be as extreme as I have to leave my job, So there are many different ways that you'll be able to help that why. And we'll go through so many of those over these 21 lives. But really think about what is it that is causing me, and it's not necessarily anything that is to your fault at all. It might be something that has been conditioning you from very, very young. It might be that you just have a complete horrible boss and work situation, but really think about what it is, and that will really help when it comes to recovery. So that is it. That is the live for this evening. I really hope that you found this helpful. I've covered quite a lot. There's lots to think about. I will put a picture of the cycle of unwellness up after this because I know that anyone watching it on Instagram, it was backwards. I'm sorry. And then tomorrow, what are we talking about tomorrow? We're talking about work-life balance. So we're going to talk about whether work-life balance actually exists. And if your why is to do with work, then this will be a really, really good one for you. So think about your whys this evening, and I will see you tomorrow at the same time. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.